make a joke of the joke, right?
Right.
There's an extraordinary and obvious lack of seriousness in many of far right conservative, as they like to call it, positions
Which
and
they're not.
ideas. Certainly Trump himself.
Right.
So lampoon it. Like you said,
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. It's like you can't treat it seriously or you legitimize it.
Hey there, welcome to Good Guys Getting Better. I'm Christian Hanley.
I'm Aleem Boatwright.
So Aleem, you know this, but I was out of commission for a little bit. I was out of the country, not too far, but in Mexico for a friend's wedding. So just kind of getting back now, and nothing happened while I took that short break. Nothing happened in the Middle East, on America's college campuses, on Capitol Hill, like nothing. It's been totally chill, right? Yeah, it's been quiet. It's been quiet. Well, let's jump right into it because there's one thing I wanted to actually talk to you about because John is not here this week. Now, he's the one traveling and doing some stuff. But there's something I really want to get your take on as a non-lawyer on this pod, and that is...
And proud of it.
Yeah, and as you should be. Notice that neither John nor I are actively practicing. We use our education every day, but in slightly different ways. But so the New York trial right now for Donald Trump, the criminal trial, everyone's calling it the hush money trial. I wrote about this on Substack before my flight, and I was watching it a little bit up until I left. I've not been watching all the testimony everyone's talking about right now and writing about right now, because Hope Hicks, Trump's former communications director, just testified. Everyone's talking about that. Stormy Daniels, former attorney, as well. What I want to know is, so I wrote about sort of why this even matters, why it's not really about an adult film star, why it's not really about an affair, and what it actually has to do with campaign finance law. But I want to ask you as a non-attorney, do you think that anyone in the public or anyone on the jury pulled from the public actually understands that and what this is underneath all the news coverage, underneath all the sort of legal machinations, what this is actually about?
Yeah, so that's a very good and important question because I feel like, before I offer my opinion, I feel like that's often missed in by the people who are really deep into the legal issues in these types of situations. They automatically assume that the explanation resonates with everyone who hears it, right?
Right. Right.
This is wrong because of this, that, and the third. When you start to ask the proverbial man on the street, and somebody say, "Oh, I don't really care about that," and they lose sight of that. So
yeah,
I think so. To first answer your question, I'd say there's a large percentage of people. I would not necessarily go as far to say a majority of people who don't really understand it.
Yeah,
and I think what happens is that out of that group of people who don't understand it, they're going to lean on whatever their leanings are. So if they are favor for Trump, then this is just, they're using this and it's no big deal and they're trying to bring him down with something irrelevant. If they're opposed to Trump and recognize his insanity, then they'll more so say, well, this is yet another example of how bad he is,
right.
So which is obviously the right answer. But so the reality is that unless you educate people on how it is legally wrong, which is the core issue, but then why that legal why that criminal activity is damaging, why that hurts people, why it sets a bad precedent, all these different types of things. Because some people say, if you cheat on your taxes, it's no big deal, right? Well, here's what cheating on your taxes does. You have to understand why that's not good. And in fairness, there are some laws that don't hurt people that are bad laws, right? And people, but again, you can't just assume everybody understands all of this, and that's the challenge. Right. So to answer your question, I'd say, I think there's a lot of people out there who are just like, okay, well, I don't really get it, but I don't like Trump anyway, or I don't really get it, and Trump's my guy, and they keep it moving.
Because one of the things that I saw, and even was reading about from an expert earlier this morning, was just the fact that one thing Trump's defense has been to make it about the fact that he was trying to hide this affair or this interaction, as it were, if it's not an
Mhm.
ongoing affair, from his wife, because then it would not really matter. It would not be about influencing the election.
Yeah.
But from what I sort of saw after the fact, I think that the testimony everyone's talking about right now is, like I said, Hope Hicks, the former communications director. Her testimony apparently undercut that he really did know this was about the election, and the entire payoff was to catch this story, have the Inquirer buy the exclusive rights to it, and then not publish it so that they could avoid that bad press during the election. But even that still, do you think that there's a way to explain that series of facts such that people who are not attorneys in the jury pool or on the jury now could actually get their heads around that and not be fooled by these arguments that really, it's about, not getting in the doghouse. It's not about, it's not about him trying to avoid yet another divorce.
Well,
it really is about the election.
Well, I mean, I think, just to touch on that point is that, you look historically at the man, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find any example of him doing anything publicly that was not for his own personal benefit, right?
Right.
Or personal preservation of his reputation as he wants to see it, or for furthering a narrative about himself. So he doesn't typically, at least in my recollection over the last 40 years of being growing up as a tri-state area resident, he's not a person who's helping other people, who's looking out for other people's well-being. That's just not him. And not everybody has to be, a philanthropist, so to speak, but just on bare facts is that he's very much a self-centered person. That's what that's his general mode. So for him to be trying to preserve his appearance to his wife or his relationship, which he's demonstrated what he really feels about, how he feels about those personal relationships, is not really that huge of a deal to him.
Right.
I mean, it's these things. I'm saying this is obviously my opinion, but the reality is that it's borne out by history, right? So when you explain that, okay, well, clearly that's not what he was doing, and then you have testimony like from a Hope Hicks and others who say, no, this guy was just worried about this campaign. He's trying to win this campaign. That's really all he was about. And obviously, the purpose for winning the campaign was to further his celebrity, and which is to make more money and have more power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's all he's about. He's, if not anything else, he is extraordinarily consistent in those facts. That's what his goals are.
Yeah.
So I think when you lay it out like that for the potential jury pool and for the general public, and then challenge them to prove that wrong. Like, show me where he's done something, like, where he's laid on the, fell on his sword for somebody. He's never done that. Like, that's not what he does. And I dare you to point to where he's done that. Where has he hurt himself to help someone else? He doesn't do that.
I mean, but even if you were to argue it wasn't that it was self-serving, that he was trying to prevent himself from getting in trouble at home, even that doesn't line up based off of what we've been hearing about the cover-up.
Yeah.
And the fact that that he, tried this entire shell game. Like, here's the thing. If he were just trying to get his wife not to find out, he could have done that in other ways. And he could have paid for it directly. This entire shell game he did, though, of like pretending to pay his lawyer and pretending that it was for legal fees, and this whole thing that Michael Cohen, let's not forget, already served time for. Right? It's not even a question this was illegal, right? Like, somebody else already went to jail for it.
Exactly.
That was clearly to try to keep his fingerprints off of this entire arrangement. And for what other purpose than to avoid him being caught up in it during the election? And the thing that I wanted to make clear to people, and I put this in Substack, was just that, the state crime he's alleged to have committed is business fraud, that he pretended to be paying legal fees when in fact he was paying somebody off and using his lawyer as a go-between. But that was then in furtherance of a federal crime, which was this election interference, which really what it is not that it was interference in terms of just trying to influence, which, every American has the right to weigh in on elections and matters of public interest. It was the fact that he was engaged in an activity that basically when you have any campaign donation coming in or expenditure going out, that has to be disclosed, and in federal campaigns, to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission. And then that's publicly available. Anybody can go on Google, look that up, go into the website, pull up the campaign, see the receipts, right? You can
Yeah.
see how the money is flowing, and that's, for the public interest. But there's something called in-kind contributions where you're not literally using the cash, right? But like, let's just say, for example, that you are putting out a mailer, right? Before an election to get people to go out and vote for your candidate.
Yeah.
Right. If a print shop or consultant or anybody is going to give you that mailer for free because they're supporting you, that has to be disclosed as a contribution, even if it's not in the form of cash, because that replaces something that would have had to have been paid for in cash.
I'm tracking.
And in this case here, if you're doing something to avoid the expense of damage control, there's the main thing, which is trying to conceal from the public this bad news, right? But then there's also the fact that if that bad news had gotten out, you would have had to have paid your communications team or outside consultants or whomever to clean up that mess. That would have been an expense that a donor or donors would have had to have paid for from their contributions. And none of that is now on the books or was ever on the books because of this entire payoff, this entire arrangement here. And I think that's the part that kind of gets a little bit muddied in all of this. It's not just the influence, it's the fact that they tried to circumvent the entire disclosure process that the public has a right to know.
Sure.
Which is, it's not just the fact of the sexual conduct in the first place. It's this money that is not being disclosed that the public has the right to know about. I mean, do you think that that's clear to anyone at this point anymore? Or is there so many layers of BS and equivocations and defenses that gets lost in the fray?
No, I think it, the latter is true, is that, there's so much that over the last, probably, let's say 30 years at least, there's been a concerted effort by, and I won't even say this is by the political parties themselves, but by political operatives, to separate the need of the public to know about their candidates from the political discourse. So I think that, and in fairness, this goes back to even with Bill Clinton, right? It's like, okay, what he's doing in his private life is not really a part of what he's doing, as a politician. That's arguable, right, in certain aspects, right? When it's something like this, when it's something like misconduct, and things like that, I think people need to understand that that's the kind of person you're dealing with. So I feel like, people are now in the frame of thought, in the way of thinking that, well, that has nothing to do with why I would, whether how he can run this country, So they automatically are inclined to feel that way. So they don't crave this information this way they once did, unless it's against the person who they're against, right? And then when it's against the person they're for, they're like, oh, well, we don't need to know all that, and that's not. What does that have to do with anything? His ability to run the country, that sort of thing,
right?
But let me ask you this question though, as from the legal perspective, if he had just said, look, I'm going to come out of my pocket with however hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'm going to pay you directly, or I'll pay, what's his name, Pecker. I'll pay him to pay you.
Right.
I didn't make the name up.
I know. It's just, it's
I'm gonna
the whole thing just seems made up, does it not? The names, the fact pattern, all of it just seems fake.
It's really made for TV. I mean,
it is.
But so if he had just come out of his pocket and said, no, money he just had somewhere, and that wasn't campaign funds, but it was actually just his cash, and said, here, go pay her so she won't say anything. Would that have been illegal?
If he
had used personal funds,
right? Which I mean, well, that's sort of what happened, though, right? I mean, it was that Cohen took the home equity loan out, used that money, and then Trump reimbursed him. Yeah, and then they falsified the records about that.
But Trump reimbursed him out of campaign funds.
So it doesn't hinge on that, though. It hinges on the fact that they lied about it in their business records cover up the trail, right? It's one of those things where like the lie gets a life of its own and the cover up becomes worse than the underlying thing, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the issue. So you're saying in a hypothetical, if he had just said like, here's 130 grand, go away.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. I think the only person or the only people who could answer that very definitively would be New York New York attorneys, because just based off how you're asking it, I wouldn't think that would.
See, he paid it out of his business accounts.
And well, so it's the fact that they falsified the records, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that then gives the prosecution something to grasp onto there to get him for.
I see.
And then what amplifies it, from what I can gather, is the fact that then it was used not just to falsify the records, but it was falsification in order to then be able to commit this other offense, this federal offense, which was not disclosing this campaign expenditure. So that's a little bit tricky. I'm afraid to answer that, clearly one way or the other, just because that's very. It's a great question. It's just it's nuanced, and it's sort of in an area that's too specialized for me to say clearly or definitively yes or no one way or the other. But even if here's the other thing too, is that it's an interesting hypothetical. But then what I would have to come back to you and ask is, what would be the point? Because let's say there was no fraud, right?
Sure.
He just, outright paid that money.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was out of a campaign account or out of his wallet, whatever, it would still need to be disclosed in public filings at the federal level, because if he paid it out of his own funds, that would be a campaign contribution, right? Because he's paying for a campaign expense. Sure. Which is good PR, or rather the absence of bad press, right?
Yeah.
And if it were out of campaign funds, it would still be a campaign expense, which also would need to be disclosed. And then at that point, any journalist who is pulling up FEC filings would have grabbed onto that story and said, wait a minute, why is there money going to a porn star? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it to do that, it's a great hypothetical, but I'm curious, I'm not sure that would even able to have happened,
So the point is, you have to establish, and for the prosecution, they have to establish the defense. The state has to establish. Excuse me, not the defense. Excuse me. Establish the intent for why it was being paid, and it's kind of obvious that it was to the furtherance of his campaign, but he's going to argue, no, it wasn't. Like you said, that it was just so I wouldn't be in the doghouse with my wife, whatever. Which is, like I said, like we all talked about it already. But so the question is that, the intent matters in this particular crime. It's not just if it was done or not. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and from what I gather, that was the entire point of the prosecution calling Hope Hicks this past week.
Yeah.
Was for her to establish the fact that he knew full and well it was not to just keep it from Melania, it was to keep it from the world. It was to keep it from the voting public.
Now, what might be even more interesting is that probably Melania probably knew.
I mean, look, she was wife number 3. And, I didn't grow up in the tri-state area, but I'm from the Northeast. Sure. And so I didn't get the front row seat like you did, but I still can't remember an age at which I wasn't aware of this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? He's been a sleazebag in the public eye since the 70s.
Exactly.
It's really hard to imagine that she didn't know what she was getting into with him. I mean, So, look, she might have not known the exact sordid details, but the fact that he was disgusting, I think she probably, she had to have known.
Yeah.
I mean, I fully believe and have the utmost sympathy for people who, marry someone who's a total stranger, psychopath. They're, the rare case where they are evil geniuses, live a second life, whatever. He never lived a second life. He would go and do disgusting shit and then get it in the newspapers. It was never top secret how disgusting he was.
Nope. He was right up front, and doing his little thing at Studio 54, and
man. And the company he kept. I mean, for God's sake, he still to this day talks about how much he misses Roy Cohn. I mean, sleazebag number one.
I still laugh. I mean, I know it's really taboo to talk about Epstein, but like,
Yeah.
they were fast friends. Like, they weren't like they were. It's like people talk so bad about Epstein, and they're trying to tie him to all kinds of people. This is literally a guy he actually spent time with, like, and partied with, like. So,
oh yeah.
What do you not hold him accountable for that?
Well, no, because the people who support him live in a different bubble, and this is kind of what I'm getting to with this next story. But like, the same people who go around talking about how Democrats and people in Hollywood and all these different groups are like part of this evil pedophile ring linked in with all this stuff, right? Yeah. Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton, like. There are videos. There's one in particular of Epstein and Trump dancing together, staring at women like a third their age. Yeah.
You got to completely go like this to not like. It's extraordinarily obvious.
That's what they do, and so that was what I wrote about this week. So yeah, so in this latest NBC poll, they commissioned two pollsters, one Democratic, one Republican. And it wasn't a poll that kind of they gauge support of each candidate based off voters' party affiliation, right? So it wasn't like how good were Democrats feeling about Biden versus how good were Republicans feeling about Trump. It wasn't that. It was looking at how people got their news, and then based upon that question, in what direction were they leaning between the two leading candidates, right? And so in the middle, where there was not crossover, but sort of closer numbers, you'd have, for example, people who relied on cable news were maybe 55 to 35 Trump versus Biden. And it was maybe flipped for broadcast news, right? For, higher Biden support, lower Trump support. Sure. The farther you got away from that, though, and on the one hand, you went more internet, more social media, the more Trump support you got. And it fell off quickly. So you went from like, away from cable news and into like websites, and then social. By the time you got to people who consumed just social media and not traditional news, it was much higher Trump numbers.
Sure.
The worst was people who said, I don't know anything about what's going on. They would say they do not consume any news about politics, full stop. Their support was something like, 70% Trump. Wow. Even as they conceded, they didn't know what was going on in American politics, right?
Amazing.
The inverse, though, people who actually read. Let me underline that. Read. I'm not talking watch TV. I'm not talking go on the internet. I'm talking read the paper. Can tell you, unlike Sarah Palin, what they read, who they read. The numbers there. Do you want to guess what the support for Biden was versus Trump?
I don't even want to guess. Just go right and
over 70%.
Well, I mean,
so people who actually know what was going on, they were like, no Trump, you cannot go for Trump. And the people who still, their vote counts just as much, and said that they do not follow what's happening in the world. It was almost a mirror image how much they supported Trump as opposed to Biden.
So here's the thing, and I harp on this all the time, is that it's really about people who do thoughtful analysis, right? And you don't have to be a heavy reader to do thoughtful analysis. That just happens to be an indication that you might be one of those people who does thoughtful analysis. You can follow social media and not read anything and still actually learn how to understand positions and opinions and hear things and process it. You can completely do that. Right. But the reality is that that's not what people do typically. They get regurgitated, news from whatever source that they trust or that they like, and they just absorb it and then they spit it back out. So it's like, okay, well, Trump's not doing this, or he's not, he's a good, he's saved our there's like all kinds of craziness, and it's like that's going to lead me to vote this way. It's really amazing, but.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, because I was listening to the radio. Speaking of a form of media consumption, but in my defense, I was driving. I could not have been reading the paper while driving, at least not safely. And they were interviewing. I'm blanking on his name right now, but they were interviewing former reporter who's now the CEO of The Onion,
Mm.
The Onion got bought out by some group of investors who are online media folks, and he basically proceeds from the premise that disinformation has already won.
Mm.
That fight has already been had and lost. And so the best method of dealing with that right now is lampooning it.
Mm.
That by trying to have this fight about like, well, no, that's not true. Here's the real truth. We're basically trying to fight a battle that was already lost, almost a decade ago. I mean, what do you think about that?
No. I that when you said it, I was like, you know what? I agree. And I sort of I echo that a little bit in some things I've said in pods past. In that I was like, you know, make a joke of the joke, right?
Right.
There's an extraordinary and obvious lack of seriousness in many of far right conservative, as they like to call it,
Mm-hmm.
positions
Which
and
they're not.
ideas. Certainly Trump himself.
Right.
So lampoon it, like you said.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. It's like you can't treat it seriously, or you legitimize it.
Right.
You make it reasonable in some regard.
Right.
And that's the tragedy, is that that's what happened in 2016, right?
Right.
Is that you started treating this guy like he was saying things that were reasonable, or that
Right.
were on some same platform, or on the same level of seriousness as what the other side was saying, and that's just not true. Not to say there weren't Republicans who did say things that are on that level. There are Republican positions that are reasonably counter positions, but then there are just absurdities, right? And there are just comical foolishness that we get from Trump, and that's the problem, is that we're not treating it as that. And and I think a lot of the media began to regret that after they saw that our need to profit off of this guy being on the air had got us in a situation where now we've legitimized his lack of seriousness. But
and we've seen it on this pod too. I mean, it's a new pod. I mean, we've done this for a few months now, but in most podcasts, you look at their numbers. It's like episode 1,000. It takes a long time to build momentum. So we've been trying things out to see what listeners will pick up on, and building the audience and things like that. It's a long process. We're in it for the long haul, but I think we've discussed this offline, and we might as well tell folks now. It's totally fine. It's no big secret. But like when we pull a clip and cut that and put it on social, if it is about something important, what we really want to talk about in this pod, with how we're taking care of ourselves in this atmosphere we're living in, how we're raising our children in this environment of lack of accountability, and where everything seems to be basically upside down in terms of how we should be behaving versus what is rewarded. Any of that stuff that's sort of evergreen content, it'll be valuable years from now. You might not even get any engagement. Some folks might look at it, but that's about it. It's not you tag, you hashtag, Trump, whatever. We have like a 60-second clip about the latest stupid thing he did. And it will be 7,500 clicks and this torrent of comments of just like unhinged, semi-violent, vile stuff. And it's like, but it's online on podcasts, it's clicks.
Yeah.
Now it is too for a lot of legacy media that has to share their content online. But like for TV, it's ratings, and you can tell like that when it's about Trump's outrages. He's been working the media for the better part of half a century, and now it's even more base instinct, even more amygdala oriented than ever. It's whatever is disgusting is going to sell. And man, like, it doesn't matter if it's on TV or online. Anything about Trump is going to go right to the front. It's going to generate all the ad revenue.
That's the sad truth. My son's recently gotten into The Simpsons, and it just a quick aside. I promise I'll bring it right.
No, you're good. You're good, man.
So I didn't even realize the Simpsons had been on for 30 for years. Like it was like,
Yeah,
man,
89, I think,
and
right?
I remember watching it as a kid. Almost, I remember it beginning, right? And then I had to
Yeah.
think back. It's like, man, it started in 1989, so I was
Yeah.
9 years old when it came out, and I'm
You were
like,
allowed to watch that?
and that's what I'm saying. It's like I really wasn't allowed to watch it, but I don't think my parents had a huge issue with it, right?
Oh, see, my mom had this thing like because he talked back to his parents, I wasn't allowed to watch it. Yeah,
well,
no.
I think there was, my family, despite having somewhat of a strict upbringing in their ideology, I think what they did understand about my brother and I is that TV was TV. That was only on TV. Like we did not emulate anything we saw on TV, and I think they sort of understood that. So we were a big television family in a sense. We didn't have our shows that we watched incessantly, except for 60 Minutes. My dad had to watch 60 Minutes every Sunday. It was so funny. I used to hate 60 Minutes. Now I crave 60 Minutes. It's hilarious.
Because now you're the dad.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't get to watch as much as I want. But anyway, so then The Simpsons actually used to come on, like I think right after 60 Minutes, ironically, on Fox, and that was CBS. So I used to watch it, right? And I loved the show. It was hilarious. And I was like, man, I was really allowed to watch The Simpsons back then. The same thing you just said. But then what he noted is that it changed a lot, right? So my son noted. He actually asked Alexa. He said it used to be rated TV PG, and over the last 10 years or whatever, maybe 15 years, it's been rated TV 14. So it's different now, and the content changed. So the I guess the point is that the entertainment has changed so much, right? That our politics are now entertainment, and they made that point is that there was this one episode in The Simpsons where where they talk a little bit about the politicians and that sort of thing, and they used to have George Bush on there, the elder George Bush and all that, and they used to talk about these things, and my son and I were also watching Back to the Future, right? And Doc Brown says at one point when he's surprised that Ronald Reagan was president, 1956, and he was like, he said, well, no wonder your president has to be an actor because television is so important now, and it was like just funny how that resonated today. Is like he's even back then it was on this trajectory to looking at you have to be an entertainer to be a politician. You can't just be a politician. And that's
it's funny too because you mentioned those two pop culture references, each of which in their own way foreshadowed Trump becoming president. Right?
Absolutely.
Like that was Back to the Future. What, the second one where this becomes in the future that same disgusting Boris, the worst of white America, becoming personified, right? Becoming president. And then same thing with The Simpsons too.
Yeah. So that's where we are, right? And so we crave entertainment in every aspect. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we need it so much. It's like it has to be in every aspect of our reality. We have to be entertained, or we won't participate. Right.
Well, no, that's. I think you answered the question right there. That's very much a bad thing. I mean, it's like no, it's normal. It's human to want entertainment and to want that sort of thing. But like, it's gone from entertainment being sort of an end of the day thing. You've worked all day, and this is your 15 minutes of relief or whatever. To it has to be in our politics. Like, okay, if politics is reduced to entertainment, and that entertainment, even for the politicians, it's kind of like, it is advertising, right? They know if they make some outrageous speech that no one's going to watch on TV, they can clip that and put it on the internet, and that will get clicks from their supporters, will then give them money. It's the same business model, essentially, as any other social media endeavor. Okay, but great. So then you're like riling up your base, you're getting donations. Who's worrying about stuff like, I don't know, roads and bridges and schools?
Sure. Yeah.
The boring stuff that we all actually need more than we need clicks.
Well, the whole notion of make work life fun, make everything fun. It sounds good at face value, and I would agree. That sounds like a reasonable premise. But when you start to think about it, not everything about life is fun, right?
No,
right? There are lots of things we do that just are not fun. And that really don't need to be. They're just things we do to survive, right?
Right.
And I guess that's probably been that way from the dawn of human existence. Is that hey, there's time for entertainment, and there's time for seriousness, and there's time for all these different things. So not everything's going to be fun, not everything's going to be entertaining, but it still has to be done. And I think we've gotten accustomed to, no, we can make everything fun, and we'll find a way. Donald Trump made politics for a lot of people. He made it fun. He made it funny because people who don't understand the seriousness and are so far separated from the realities of the decisions that are being made at that office, in that office, that they're like, hey, yeah, he's a clown, and I enjoy him in this role. Well, when you start to see that 10 years from now, 20% more of the population is going to be in poverty, or the wars that are going to take place in this world, all these different things, our climate is raised another 2 degrees, temperature is raised another 2 degrees. Then you start to understand, it's like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have been so seeking out entertainment that time, but I needed to actually be seeking out right.
But even 20 years ago, that was a thing with George W. Bush. That was the classic line, like, which candidate would you rather go have a beer with?
Have a beer with. There you go. Yeah.
Who cares? I mean, like, really, who cares? Yeah. One's like talking about, okay, we have this existential crisis. You mentioned climate change, and Al Gore's talking about that back when there was actually a chance of doing something about it. And then George Bush is like, I'm the fun kid. Never mind which, like, he's not even like the Texas cowboy, right? He's from like the most patrician, elitist Connecticut family ever that just happened to get oil money. And he goes down there and puts on this whole freaking rodeo show, buys a ranch last minute and pretends he's a cowboy from the middle of nowhere. Right? His grandfather's literally Prescott Bush of Connecticut. He's born in Connecticut. But people go for the whole game, the whole shtick, and it's like that. It's the same thing. It's politics, it's sportsmanship. Which, look, I mean, what I do for work. It's not mostly candidates I work with. It's a lot of other groups and things that are participating in the democratic process, and there has to be some personal, human interest. You can't just go out there and sell a 57 point, policy. Like, no, you have to actually relate people's stories in order to get them to engage with whatever you're trying to talk about that does have some public interest and political import. But this entire idea of making everything about public life, about civic engagement, purely entertainment is like, it's long-term. It's bad, man. It's bad. But there's a place for real entertainment, and you were talking about this before we got started, because now we have this dynamic in which, like, politics is basically like every other entertainment thing. It's like my team versus their team, whatever. It's very much like a rap battle, like East Coast versus West Coast. Like, you wanted to talk about this whole Kendrick Lamar thing, what's going on with that? Like, that's an appropriate. Well, appropriate, is that the right word? I don't know, but like, that's okay. Like, that's pop culture, that's entertainment, that's not politics, right? That's where there's a space for that sort of thing, right?
And the reality is, and I'll talk a little bit about my read on this situation. But the reality is that these are the things that are important to a certain demographic, right? Our age and younger, of course. We've invested in these artists over time, so they occupy a lot of space in our minds daily, right? It's like, if we listen to music, we listen to Kendrick Lamar, we listen to Drake, we listen to J. Cole, all of which I've listened to songs by all three of those artists, and I've enjoyed them. But the reality is that I decide that I feel like you said, I compartmentalize. That is entertainment. They're not in a massive way steering me in any political direction. But at the same time, there's times when these different artists will step into different concepts and ideologies and discussions that I do find bigger than the music, right? And that sort of brings me to the situation, I think. I think Kendrick Lamar has a reputation for being a little bit more willing than most artists to step into social justice issues and issues of race and that type of thing. And I think he may consider himself a bit of an activist to some extent at times. J. Cole has, I always appreciated his poetry and how he talks about some concepts in a very artistic way, and into his music. Drake, probably to the least extent, he's more of a purely entertainment music, but he also has very catchy beats and rhythms and things that arguably some people say other people wrote, but it is neither here nor there. It's come from him. It's got his name on it. But they're all listenable. All of them have listenable music. Um, but a couple of them, J. Cole and Kendrick in particular, have this reputation of being a little bit more serious, a little bit more artistic. And I think in order of that the view, it's probably Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, then Drake in that regard. So I didn't even really understand that these three guys had a bit of a beef going for the last decade, frankly, more than that, in fact. They had worked together, as most of the really big, high-selling artists do. They worked together early on, I think, in 2011, 12, 13 timeframe. And then there started to be, I think, some divisions between them, where Kendrick Lamar started basically attacking the authenticity of specifically of Drake and probably to a lesser extent J. Cole. And I think what made it very interesting is that I think it started out probably as just an attack on just what battle rapping used to be, which is I'm a better rapper than you, and this is about me being more talented and a better MC than you are. But then I think it sort of got a lot more personal. And I think that brings us to what happened, I think, over the last couple of months. I think, in 2023, and I there's a Today article that sort of timelines a little bit of this that I'm using to help me walk through it a little bit. But back in 2023, late last year, J. Cole, I guess he opined that these three guys were the big three in rap right now, which I think many people probably wouldn't argue that much, and that all three of them have appeal beyond across generations, right? And they're not like the newest rap, which has a reputation for being very, very shallow and very, very much, very. And I tend to be in that camp that believes that as well. But also the older generations who want a little bit more substance in the rap. So J. Cole said we're the big three, and he sort of put himself on top as like I'm Muhammad Ali, and the greatest of them. But then
humble too.
Was that?
So humble too.
Yes. Well, rap, you can't be humble in
no. Yeah.
But so Kendrick Lamar came out basically in March, so a couple months ago, and basically said there's only him. He's the guy, basically.
Okay.
And so J. Cole initially, came out with a response that had mixed reviews, but he was engaging in the battle. But then J. Cole, which surprised everybody, he said, "You know what? I'm sorry. I didn't want to do that. I don't want to go here. I'm out. I'm not even battling with you." And he basically tried to make amends with Kendrick and was like, "I'm done." And I, to some extent, I guess that was accepted by Kendrick Lamar. He said, "All right, fine. I'm, you're out, whatever." But then it just pretty much now has become Drake and Kendrick Lamar. So Drake came back with some stuff, and now it's gotten so all that's the background. But now the jabs that are being thrown in these battle raps that are coming out are very personal, right? Kendrick Lamar's calling out Drake's unwillingness to claim his children that he has, and not being a father, and using his perpetrating, basically trying to pretend like he's something he's not. First of all, you're not African American, you're Canada, and you grew up among white people, and you're only black when you need to be, and basically, talking that he's using his light skin privilege, so to speak, because I think Drake is of mixed race. I believe he may be his mother, I think, is Jewish. I'm not sure exactly.
I have no idea
his full background, but
all I know is he was on Degrassi.
Yes,
I will own how white I am, and the fact that I have spent a little bit of time in Canada. I don't know, man.
Drake. I always said Drake is. I think he's a very funny guy. He's good. Good comedic actor. That was my opinion of him. Like I didn't watch Degrassi, but I did see him on the show before. And I also had seen him, on Saturday Night Live. I think his Saturday Night Live performance was one of the best of a guest star. Like he's just because he's funny. He's legitimately funny. But I never thought that much of his lyrics and his rap. It's like, oh, just listenable music. So I guess Kendrick Lamar was coming at that, and it's like there's some underlying personal issue here as well. So Kendrick Lamar threw something out at Drake. Drake came back just recently, and with something catchy. And then, like an hour later, Kendrick Lamar hit him with another one, and then a day later, another one. So it was like
it was that fast.
Kendrick Lamar is basically burying him now at this point because
wow.
and it's interesting to see it because it's all really what this all boils down to: people getting into camps behind these two people, right? And you see where people stand on this. Teray is doing a good job covering it. Teray, he on his Instagram page, he's very much a rap aficionado, and he's always talked bad about Drake, so he's definitely biased. He really likes Kendrick, and he doesn't really like Drake. But he's doing a lot of interesting captures of people's reaction to this. And what you see is the two camps are people who don't care that much about substance, and people who do care that much about substance in music. And it's like, all right, well, you don't want to say you're a bad person because you don't care about substance in music and activism, and you're not a good person because you do. So but the reality is that that's really where the break is that you see the pure artists, so to speak, saying no, Drake is nowhere near, like he's not even close in this battle, like, and and then you see the people who are just, I just like to run to my music, or I just like to bop my head in the car. There a lot of them are just sitting with Drake. So I guess the reason why I thought this is useful to this conversation, to our pod, is that the polarization that's created by this, right? By just simply two rap artists. If we go back, to my teenage years, you got the Biggie and Tupac, right? Where that polarization turned into violence, and it was weird in that I didn't feel violent. I was never, I was never a huge fan of either one of them. You get, I was more of an R&B type person myself. That's just my thing. But I listened to it because I'm in New Jersey. I'm in the tri-state area. Biggie's huge, and Tupac was very popular as well. So it's like, rap is a thing in the tri-state area. That's the birthplace of it, right? So it's like you hear it, and then you start to see people mad at each other about this. It's like, well, what's going on? So we're getting back there, but now it's like the generations now who are really deep into this, they're not. I don't think they're as violent physically as I guess my generation was. But at the same time, they're verbally.
Let's keep it that way if we could. Let's keep it on Instagram and and TikTok. That's
healthier,
not
right. That's healthy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's the same issue, is that people still will dislike each other. People will still fight with each other. They can't keep it. It's almost like there's no good fights. Right. There's no healthy fights. Right. It's like, and I'm getting to a philosophical sort of concept now, is that, you say, oh, well, we duked it out. We shook hands after. Okay. Well, is that okay that you duked it out to begin with? But you did shake hands after. That's a good thing. But you're always, when you're starting to exact violence or violent energy on somebody else or on another group of people for whatever the reason, then you've stepped into another zone of human expression that is, I'm not sure that's ever really healthy. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's.
Well, I don't think it is either, but I think it very much ties into the moment. Like you mentioned, the 90s and Tupac and Biggie, and we talked about in our politics right now, and we mentioned even in that context how that goes back not quite as far, but about as far, with George W. Bush being like the guy you want to have a beer with versus the nerd you don't want to talk to, with Al Gore. I think, it's gotten at its worst now with social media, but this has gone on for about 30 years now,
Yeah.
right? Of like,
Yeah.
anytime you have this us versus them, it's always a dichotomy, right? It's never a multi-part. It's always A versus B, one versus two. It's right.
Sure.
It's one versus the other. One, I think you're right. Like, who does it benefit in the grand scheme of things? But two, like, you got to think about who does it benefit. It's
Yeah.
the people who are engaging in that us versus them sort of thing, that whether it's record sales or it's clicks or it's downloads or it's fundraising in the case of politicians, like, the people who benefit from it are there, but they're few and far between. Like you said, I don't think it really helps people in the public at all, but that really is what it is, because the controversy itself, I honestly don't like. In the case of our politics right now, it actually has become something, right? Like,
Yes.
you could argue 20 something years ago it was totally fake or exaggerated for the purpose of ginning up more controversy and therefore more public attention. In the case of now, we get to the point of the 21st century and Trump. It's like, okay, do we want to have like a 21st century version of fascism versus, like, the guy who, like, yeah, he's imperfect. His track record isn't great on certain things from when he was in the Senate, but like, he's normal,
Yeah.
right? But in this case too, in pop culture, it's like, okay, like, is this actually about nothing versus substance, or is the entire controversy itself literally about no substance whatsoever? It's purely about having the controversy for the sake of the public interest it'll generate, the reaction, and therefore increase clicks, attention, publicity, money.
Yeah, that is the question. Is it, who I like how you phrase that. Who does it benefit? Or I don't think it benefits anyone publicly. These types of debates don't benefit anyone publicly.
Right.
But they do benefit someone financially, individuals, obviously, their raising of their profile and their financial prospects. But at what cost, right? I think if you're arguing something to build, right? You're arguing something to build a better understanding, find a solution, all these different things. And this is a good segue into what we're dealing with what's happening in Gaza and the Israeli government, right?
Yeah.
You have people protesting and just at odds. Once again, as always winds up the case in Middle East politics, people stop talking to each other. They stop hearing each other. They start just being angry. They start offending each other. They start saying how bad you are and how bad they are, and so forth and so on. And there certainly are bad people. That's not like you can call people bad, but at the same time be working to build a solution, right? And that's where we wind up. So, and once again, who does that benefit, right? So
I think that's the problem with everything being an us versus them, is that you do have scenarios, like I mentioned before, like with Trump versus, I don't even want to say versus Biden, versus normalcy, versus democracy. That really is a substantive debate to be had, right? That's a real split.
Sure.
But the problem is when everything is split like that along sort of tribal lines, I think people do get numb to it. There are people who get so burnt out over the fake controversy that when there is a real one that they have to actually participate in, like the future of the country or the world, they're checked out. And I don't blame them. I mean, it is exhausting mentally. It's too much to deal with. Same thing that you said with in the international sphere with Gaza and the Middle East. It's people get so burned out and the waters get so muddied. Like that's what happens. And we can't solve this now, especially because I have to wrap soon. But like, it drives me nuts because in the case of, and I've talked about this like since last October, honestly, even before we had things like what's going on in the university campuses, the fact that once this violence started with October 7th, everything got globbed onto that, right? It wasn't just the act of terrorism and then Israel's response and how the two sides conducted themselves, and then the question of civilians who were caught in the middle, who I still would argue effectively have no one advocating for them, because Hamas sure as hell doesn't care about Palestinians. Neither does the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu. But also, like, everything else gets put into the same breath, the same news story, the same news segment where you have people being killed. But let's also talk about instances of anti-Semitism here at home, and then the college camp. Like, whoa, like these are all things that are worth talking about. But the problem is when you try to merge them all into one conversation, is even if you never say it explicitly, you're drawing very dangerous moral comparisons between literal bloodshed thousands of miles over here versus someone being an asshole with their choice of words in the safety of being here at home in the United States. And morally, they're not on the same level, even if they are, even if you're talking about things that are disgusting or distasteful that you disagree with, that isn't the same thing as quite literal violence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And who does it benefit? So that's bringing right back to that. So
yeah, no, it's certainly not helpful to the broader discussion about how to end this.
Exactly. And I feel like people need to always be seeking a solution, always be seeking common ground. And maybe that's the engineer in me, but always try to find, always be seeking a solution to the problem. That whenever you have a conversation about something, whenever you point out a concern, well, what is the answer? What is that? Right. What is it that needs to change? What is it that needs to be done differently? And think practically, right? That, obviously, if I'm Hamas, I'm going to say, well, Israel needs to disappear. Well, that's idiotic. That's not going to happen, right? And if I'm Israel, well, Hamas, everybody needs to be killed. Well, that's idiotic. That's not going to happen either, and it shouldn't.
Right.
The reality.
And that's the Jon Stewart point. Jon Stewart made that point several times, but in particular recently was like these conversations that proceed as if one side is going to go away once X, Y, and Z happens is like, no, you're going to kill more people and cause more suffering, but like no one's going anywhere. So you have to proceed based upon that premise.
Exactly. So that's where I fall out on this. If you're gonna debate something, you're gonna protest something, you're gonna resist protest, have a solution in mind,
Right. So right. No, and that's really been the thing that I cannot get past with the news coverage in the past week or so. And again, like I'll concede, I'm a little out of step here. I went from working to then having to catch a flight and then being away from American news for several days and coming right back and like, whoa, everything happened while I was offline for like 72 hours, it seems.
Yeah.
But I think that's the bigger concern that I have is that not so much that campus protests are being covered, not so much that we are having discussions about that. It's how this little thing happening over here in reaction to this big thing happening over here are being merged into one conversation where they are given equal weight and importance, or the reaction is being given greater airtime than the actual underlying thing. And it was actually, who was I watching? John Levitt's podcast, Love It or Leave It, yesterday. And he was talking about how, what we like to have in this country now at this point is conversations about the conversation, about the conversation, about the conversation, about the actual thing happening. And that was the thing, right? Like when you see what's being talked about right now, and I mean like present day May of 2024, it's less about body counts, political solutions, ongoing negotiations, anything like that. What you're getting actual longer form news coverage about is what did Bernie Sanders say versus what did Mike Johnson say versus what did Ilhan Omar say. You're not actually you're talking about the reaction to the thing rather than the thing itself.
Yeah.
And to your point, Aleem, this is why I like having you, the engineer here, it's not outcome oriented whatsoever. It's more about, okay, what's going to give more, what's going to keep people engaged more? What's going to cause more controversy rather than, okay, here's the controversy. How do we break it down, understand it, and then move past it in order to find a practical, workable solution that, even though might not be perfect, would be something that people of wildly different perspectives and lived experiences could eventually find some way to live with.
Sure, absolutely.
So anyway, well, I wish we could go on for longer, but I appreciate you finding the time on this rainy weekend here in the DC area.
I'm flying out of town for a week and a half, so I spend a little time with my son before I head out. But
where are you headed?
South Carolina.
Well, hopefully you've got better weather down there than we have up here.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's usually pretty sunny, but We shall
Very
see.
nice. Family or work?
Work. This is work.
All right. All right. Fair enough. Well, enjoy that. And thank you, listeners and viewers, for watching, listening. Don't forget to please, if you can, share your thoughts in the comments, like, share, and subscribe, all those good things. We are on Substack and YouTube. And thank you again.